We are beautifully,
The Beautifully Melanated Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Sarah. Tonight I'm here with my two lovely co-hosts.
I'm Karen.
And I'm Kay. And tonight's topic will be around good mental health. We talk about mental health a lot in society, maybe more the poor mental health. So tonight we thought, let's flip the script and share with you how to get good mental health. We're all mental health practitioners, we're all in the field, and we think it would be good to say, let's talk about good mental health and how we get there. Of course, we probably will talk about its opposite, poor mental health. But we're very excited, actually, to share this 10th episode with you. And we look forward to your comments and feedback on this episode after we publish. So I'm going to start with Sarah. Sarah, would you like to lead us off? Good mental health.
Sure. So if I start off a little bit about my journey with mental health over the years, and I'll kind of talk about things that have helped me and things that I've done to help myself and my daughter, namely. So my mental health. So generally, I'd say in my childhood, I didn't really have any kind of mental ill health issues. Mainly when I got to a teenager, I started feeling quite anxious and suffered with a lot of anxiety. And I pushed it to the back of my mind. I tried to ignore it. I thought if I didn't look at it, it would go away, like so many people that I work with think with mental health issues. I try to push it down. Got on with my life. And in my early 20s, I suffered with quite a bit of anxiety. And at that point, I was going out, I was kind of drinking, partying, etc. And I think because I was drinking and partying every weekend, I used that as a kind of crutch for my anxiety. And again, it was pushed down. When I came to my 30s, that's when I felt it kind of strongest. And one example I will use is that when I had a very major relationship breakdown in my late 30s, I suffered with tremendous amount of anxiety. Which actually led to me taking some medication for a while, which actually I have to say was a lifesaver for me. And I always think for people, there is a massive stigma about medication. And I think that's a bit unfair, actually, because for me, if I hadn't taken the medication, I would wonder how I would continue to be a good parent, because I've always said the one time I will take medication is if I feel that I am being pushed to a state where I may not be able to be fully present for my daughter. That was the only time in my life I'd felt that, because of the strange kind of situation that, led to my relationship breakdown. Anyway, that really helps. I had medication called sertraline that really, really helped me with my anxiety at the time. Another thing that kind of helped me, I'm not on medication anymore, so another thing that's kind of helped me through that is physical movement, exercise, and I also do weekly yoga. That's really helped me. And I think I had my own therapy at that point when the relationship kind of crumbled. I had my own therapy, and I think that's also very, very important for people to have access some kind of counselling or therapy if they are struggling with their mental health, alongside some sort of medication if they need it, if they feel they should need it, then to access that. And talking to friends all the time. So talking to friends all the time, physical exercise, the medication when I needed it, and just being open, I think, being open to say, I am struggling and I need some support. That was important. Now, more recently, I've been kind of helping my daughter with her mental health. She suffered at the same time as my relationship breakdown with her father. So she suffered. And she was actually getting quite anxious. So because I'm a child counsellor, I was able to use a few of the things in my kind of toolbox to help her. Another thing to note is when children are anxious, often the parents can be anxious too, and it can go hand in hand. So I knew as a parent it was important for me to kind of ground myself so I could kind of work with her and help her. So what I used for her is when she was feeling very anxious or angry, I made her go outside into the garden and kind of walk around in the garden, whether she needed to scream, whether she needed to shout, kick sticks, kick earth, etc., to get the anxiety and anger out of her body. And we also went out in the garden, we shook our bodies from head to toe. That helps her clear the anger and the anxiety. I also asked her to draw herself when she was angry. So she drew a really good kind of teeth-baring angry picture. And then next to that picture, she wrote exactly how she felt. So for these things, writing it down, dear mummy, I feel like this because, drawing a big angry face, writing down, I feel like so angry I could wreck the house, even though, of course, she's not going to wreck the house. It's about the level of anger. And then also going outside and shaking off the anger. Those three things together, along with listening to her when she's talking and sitting with her each day and checking in with her, that's what grounded her to the point now where she feels that she's processed the anger. So, yeah, that's a bit about my kind of experience with mental health and how I help my daughter. So, yeah, Karen.
So I've been really fortunate in that I've not had any major issues with my own personal mental health. I have had lots of, personal struggles, lots of difficulties. I think we all have. But I have never really struggled, I wouldn't say, with mental health. I suppose the things I use, strategies, you see, what do I use? I love my walks. I think I've said this on a previous podcast. I love going out walking now that the sun is somewhat shining. It's quite cold, but I'm able to walk and I do really enjoy that. I love just being in the fresh air. Exercise, I think, is really important. It helps to clear my head. For me, intimacy is actually very important. I think that has really helped because I think I relish from having closeness and affection. And so when I have that in my life, I do find that I'm more balanced. I try to eat well. I mean, I do love a biscuit, but aside from that, I do try to eat well. So I eat lots of fruit and veg, those sorts of things. And I have friends. I have really good, close friends who I regularly offload to. I think that's been really, really important for me. Just, sharing my thoughts, feelings, all those sorts of things. Sometimes I get stressed. I think we all do. I try to be really present in the moment. So if something happens that I've really enjoyed, or if I'm experiencing something that's really nice, I might be, I don't know, let's say I'm out with friends. I try to be really present in that moment and not kind of rush ahead to, oh my gosh, tomorrow I've got to do that. And that's something I'm really trying to train myself to do, because I think we miss so many beautiful moments because we're so worried about the next thing. So I try to do that. I would say also my mantra is, God, please give me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change. There are a great many things I have no control over. I pray for courage to be able to change the things I can. So if there's something I can actually do something about, I try not to procrastinate. I try to make a plan of action so that I can actually address that issue. And I pray for wisdom to know the difference between the two. That's a constant battle. But that's really what I live by. In terms of my daughter, I think I've also mentioned this before, she really struggled in lockdown. I think we used a lot of talk therapy, really. Lots of conversations. I think it's always better out than in. And if I think about my work, for example, I work with lots of families whose young people, children are experiencing mental health challenges. And so I spend a lot of time having a look at the presenting problem, what the issue is, and what might be keeping that problem going. And often as parents, we find it really difficult to be reflective and actually say, is there something I'm doing or not doing that could make a difference to this problem? And by no means am I placing blame on the parent. It's not about blame. I'm not saying that, parents are doing anything wrong, but we just have to be reflective, I think, and think about things, small changes that we can make that might make a difference to our children when they're struggling. So Sarah mentioned, things that she did actively with her daughter. And I'm sure she's a very reflective parent and thinks about, what things can I do to try and, support my daughter, which is what I do. I do try, and it is difficult, looking at yourself, but I think that's really, really important. Yeah. So Kay, what would you say about your own mental health?
Thanks, Karen. Apologies, listener. I do have a sore throat. I'm going to sound like a prepubertal child sometimes. But so I grew up in Jamaica. So mental health, poor or good, was not a thing. There was quite polarized, either you're mad or you're not. And there was no middle ground between sanity or insanity. So as long as you weren't insane, the assumption was you were okay. And, even language, I wouldn't say I would have known what anxiety or depression was necessarily when I was growing up, because not much attention was paid to that. But so I was in the church. So, your options when you're feeling distressed, psychological distress, is to pray and pray some more, and then fast and pray. And if you haven't resolved it through any of those means, then your faith wasn't strong enough. So, there's quite a negative impact there. And I remember hearing things from the pulpit that made me wince inside. And I just think, how on earth am I supposed to like myself if God sees me as a worm born in sin? I'm worth nothing. Ugh. Anywho, it wasn't until my mid-20s, when I had my son, who is a rainbow baby, which means he followed a stillborn child or a baby loss, that I experienced depression, postnatal depression. And I didn't accept any help from the midwife. I was in the church still, and I thought it will go on its own. Of course it didn't, because that's not how depression works. And it had an impact on my children to have a low-level depressed mom. And statistics do back that up. Sarah was saying earlier about having to look after herself when her family had that major event. Had she not done that, she could not have been able to support her daughter. The statistics are very clear that maternal mental illness distorts child development, that it can provoke child psychopathology. So if you are a depressed parent or an anxious parent, more likely your children will be anxious. That time I should have taken medication. I really, really should have. So I could have enjoyed my child, but I didn't. And I do regret that. Later on in life, when the depression came back, I did take medication, and it changed everything. I'm very pro medication for that reason. Prayer has its place, but medication also has its place. And then I went into therapy, and a lot of things made sense. And I'm just looking back thinking, the way I am with my children now, I was called very sensitive growing up, or touches. I don't know if you know what that means, but basically you're sensitive, can't take a joke. Similar to what people have been saying about Will Smith and Chris Rock, you can't take a joke. We have a saying in Jamaica, what is joke to you is death to me. And so when people would say to me, you can't take a joke, and laugh, even though I was distressed about it, I felt like I didn't have anywhere to go with that anger. So I make sure that I leave space for my children to talk about what they feel, how they feel, when they're feeling it. I don't want to pass on anything intergenerationally. We already have enough trauma in our community without adding poor mental health on top of it. So some of our strategies, music plays a big part in our house. If we're cranking the music up and having a sing off or a dance off, our mood lifts. So it's a big thing for us. Nature heals me. And I need to be beside the water to feel still and calm. And when I feel a dip in my mood, I tend to go inside myself and I need a quiet time. I really need a quiet reflection time to make meaning of it. And to others looking on, it can look like I've withdrawn. I have, but I come back out. And so my children too, I've discovered they too need their own quiet time, their reflection time. It's not for me, but exercise does lift my mood. I can really, really testify to that. Nature's antidepressant, apparently. I wish I loved it more. I do not. Reading, indulging in the things that bring joy. And that's a tough one because I think back to session 1, Karen and Sarah, when we talked about parenting and always being in survival mode. There was no option for joy. It was surviving. So it's not the easiest thing to bring joy into your life if you've not grown up with that as a concept and an attitude. So we strongly encourage each other to do the things that bring us joy, no matter how small or how big. And good sleep. Oh my God, I am just not functional without good sleep. Poor sleep makes me demented. So yeah, in terms of lifestyle, those are the things I do that we do. Sorry, Sarah?
No, Karen, I was just going to ask you, how many hours sleep do you have a night? And what's acceptable and what's not for sleep?
I can tell you how many I would like. I would love 8. I probably get about 6 or 5. I never fully feel quite rested. But when I get 8, my God, the difference in my performance and functionality the next day is significant. So I'm learning to reset my sleep pattern. But, one of the symptoms of depression is a reversal of the wake-sleep cycle. So you're awake at night and you want to sleep in the day. So for me, it always means I have to pay attention to my sleep patterns and reset them.
I was just going to mention something on the back of what you've said. So there is someone in my family, a very close family member, who suffers with mental health difficulties. Similarly to your family, it really wasn't something that we understood, or I don't think we were very supportive of at the time. And he really struggled. I think in our community, there is still stigma. I think it's getting better, but I would still say there's some stigma there around mental health.
Definitely.
And the acceptance of it and what to do with it and how to deal with it. And I don't think as a family we coped very well at all. And I think for him, he must have felt really isolated. I think he must have felt, these things were happening. He couldn't explain it. And I just think the lack of support would have, not been conducive to mental health, would it? So there's an element of guilt, I feel, that even though I was a child when it happened, or when we discovered it, I still feel that what was my part in that? How could I have helped? How could I have shown my support? And I think, I'm so glad that there is more education about it now. I think the issue that we probably have as well is that he refused any medication and he did not want any support from GPs, practices, any Western medicine, really. And I think there's also a lot of mistrust in our community around Western medicine and, theory and that kind of thing. So that's really difficult. I think that's also a challenge for us. I think there's something else to mention about medication, where I think it can be absolutely fantastic for some people. I've known lots of people, not just yourselves, that have talked about, going on antidepressants and other medication, and it's been really helpful. I think for others, they have found a dependency and have not fared so well. And it's difficult. I think each person's different.
I'll just pipe in here because I'm on top of what you're saying, Karen. I feel when I talk to a lot of the students, my sixth formers, etc., 18-year-olds, 17, 18-year-olds that go on antidepressants, I think it's really important for them to continue their counselling or therapy alongside their medication. Because I think had someone just purely had medication with no therapeutic interaction, that's when I feel dependency could happen. Now, I would definitely say if you're taking any kind of medication for anxiety or depression, I feel you would really need to be in counselling or therapy. That's my...
Absolutely agree, Sarah. The medication is only part of the treatment, but it treats the symptom, not the root cause.
Yeah, exactly.
So therapy is still needed to process what brought this on. How comes I became depressed? How comes I became anxious? What happened to me in my development? Just wanted to share some statistics briefly. So I'm looking at the rape crisis webpage, and if we think in our community, things we don't talk about very well, apart from sexuality, sexual assault, and sexual abuse. But their statistics is 1 in 5 women, 1 in 6 children, and 1 in 20 men have been raped or sexually assaulted rather. Some as an adult, some in childhood. Now imagine that this is your experience and you've had no help and you didn't tell anyone because it wasn't safe for you to tell anyone. And you've grown up with this trauma, which hasn't been processed, but does affect every aspect of your life. The medication can stabilize you, but the therapy is what's going to help you to make meaning of what happened and to heal from it.
I would even go as far as to say, I mean, that, is definitely trauma. But even outside of that, even something like, emotional abuse from parents.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was in a relationship with a partner who experienced trauma, and that was never dealt with. I don't think he knew how to seek help. And again, like I say, there's so much stigma attached to that. And that went untreated. And undoubtedly, that affected our relationship. It could be trauma from lots of different things. What you mentioned is obviously a really big one. But I think so many people have gone through so many things that's left untreated. And it does, I think, affect your life, the way that you relate to other people. It affects your relationships, work, so many things. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, I don't know, perhaps as a community, we can do more to kind of highlight these things and help reduce the stigma, perhaps.
Definitely.
I was wondering, Karen, sorry, Sarah, go ahead.
No, that's it. I just agree with what Karen said, 100%.
I was wondering, for your family member you spoke about, do you think he would have accepted help if there was more representation in the mental health system? If the doctors were Black, if he had access to therapy and the practitioner was Black, if the psychiatrist was Black, do you think he would have accepted help? Because that suspicion and reticence to engage with white professionals has some basis. We have been mistreated by the medical system for centuries. So I understand why.
Absolutely.
It would not have been a trust. Do you think it would have made a difference if he met one of us?
Absolutely. I think possibly, yeah, I think maybe that would have been an option. If had it been an option, I think it would have helped. We also introduced him to a Black woman who was a therapist, and he was happy to engage. But by then, it was quite far along. I think he'd suffered quite a few years before he came to that. But I think you're right. Had he been exposed to more people of color in this profession, I think he would have been more trusting. Also, I think it's having somebody who kind of understands what you're talking about. So your experience of growing up in Jamaica, that might be quite difficult for a practitioner to understand who doesn't really have an understanding of where you're coming from, right? Mm-hmm. So I think just having more people of color in this profession would help us. I could go on, to be honest.
Go on.
It's true. I think a lot of the kids that I see at school just need someone to relate to. There's a few Black children that I see, and we do connect on that kind of level, and they feel that they can talk kind of openly about their experiences and cultural experiences sometimes as well. That we understand each other, and they've actually said that that you understand me a lot, because I don't have to. One girl's talking about her hair and struggles with that, and where she feels about herself and her hair as a young Black girl and stuff. So I think also, not just in our community, there's also clients I have from the traveller community. So therefore, I think that's another minority of people that really need support. And I think there need to be more, for instance, more traveller therapists, to be able to help them as well. All sorts of different, I think with therapy in general, I think it needs to be a lot more
accessible
to all different types of people. So.
For example, in my place of work, we use a book to help support parents to in turn support their children. But because we worked with a large traveller community, who many of them were illiterate, so we had to try to change that into an audio book, and we are in the process of doing that now. But I think you're right. Inclusivity is the way, isn't it? That's the way forward, because we don't want to just be accessible to certain groups of people and then marginalize lots of other people. The other thing I wanted to mention about my family member who experienced a lot of mental ill health is that I think another thing that would have been helpful would have been for us as a family to have looked at where this might be coming from. Yes. And perhaps through therapy and, like I say, my own admittance is, what didn't I do? Could I have helped more? Maybe his parents could have had a look at themselves. That's what I'm talking about, being reflective and taking ownership and saying, actually, perhaps I didn't handle that very well. Yes. And talking through with that. And I think in the absence of that, I think he's really struggled to get better.
I think being a man as well, obviously, as we know, there's a massive issue with men and boys and mental health, and the kind of script of, I'll just swallow it down, I'll push it to the back and I'll be okay. Yes. And that's a massive problem. So I always absolutely love when I get a client that is a young man that I can really help to explore their inner world. And I've just come across, we all have so many men and boys, angry little boys that become angry young men, that become angry old men, basically. Yes. A whole life of anger boiling under. Yes. And I think as women, I think we express anger and rage, but I feel that men, they hold anger a lot longer than women, because we're more expressive, I think, often. Yeah. We express our anger, we express our rage. Men, they seem to be bottled up like to the hilt, and they just kind of seep out now and then. Very, very few men do I meet that know how to healthily express their anger. Yeah, so...
Yeah,
so
and
important.
I will say, shame and rage are closely connected. Underneath shame, there is always rage.
Yep.
So if we have a young person walking around full of rage and wants to destroy the world, that young person is telling us internally they are feeling like they're being destroyed. And if we respond just to the anger and say, go to anger management or look to behavior modification without understanding, why is this child so angry? Then we're missing something, especially early intervention, Karen, at the level that you work at. We really need to focus on there before they get to the inpatient system, where we know Black men are overrepresented.
Absolutely.
In the mental health inpatient psychiatric system particularly. And so we need to be a lot more curious with our children. And I just wanted to put another statistic out there from Samaritans. In 2020, 4,912 people took their own life. 75% were male.
Yeah.
That's a really high statistic.
It is.
3,682 men compared to 1,230 women. We're missing something here. And I don't want to put the responsibility back on the moms, but this feels like a close link to our pilot episode when we talked about being parented. If you're a single mom, it's harder. But parents, if they don't respond to their own trauma and their own psychological distress, then they can't support their children when their children become distressed. So probably the top tip I want to give is to, in the looking after yourself in terms of lifestyle choices, is to engage in therapy. Really engage in therapy so that you have good mental health, then you can notice your children's mental health. Because if we're all traumatized or we're all angry and we're all raging at each other and I'm beating you so you can stop misbehaving, you're going to be more angry for being beaten. And so, the cycle does perpetuate, rather than breaking it. I would love to see, and I would love to hear from the listeners on this. Are we making headway as we are providers on this podcast, but as users of mental health services, are we making headway in the Black community?
I wonder, Karen, just a quick question, Kate. Do you think poverty plays a part in this?
Yes,
do you think,
absolutely.
Because I would agree with that. I do think it does play a part, because I do think that if you're constantly firefighting and you don't have the capacity to look after yourself properly, I think that in turn will affect the way that you're able to parent and look after your own children, etc. So
it is researched. Socioeconomic status has a huge impact on mental health.
Absolutely.
And so, yes, some things we can't change, but some things we can. And what we can do is accept help. There are a lot more resources out there. I will put this website in the blog, but the Barton Network, www.barton.org.uk, is a register for Black and Asian therapists. It's our network. So if you want to have a Black therapist, someone who looks like you, access that website. But also, if you can't afford it, thinking about poverty, self-refer to Mind, the mental health charity. Use the support in your community and your family groups and your friends, but also take yourselves out of spaces that might make you feel shame or less than or not good enough. For me, that space was the church. I was forever in turmoil in the church, a most uncomfortable place, but I persisted because I was told that literally this is a matter of life and death. It was psychologically quite an unsafe place for me. And spent 31 years in it. So yes, I would have come out with some spiritual harm, but also some mental health challenges. So I would say also in the self-care that you do, look at the spaces where you feel enriched, where you leave a place or a person feeling good, feeling energized versus feeling drained and unsupported and exhausted. Those are also ways in which we can maintain and stabilize our moods.
Yeah, I just want to echo what you said, Kay. I think it's so important when it comes to transgenerational trauma as well to sort out your own shit so your kids don't have to sort it out, sort out your shit, basically. I'm going to put it that way. It's sorry to swear, people, but that's what it is. You sort
and if you
out
can't sort the shit yourself, bring them to therapy. We'll sort the shit.
Yeah, you sort out your shit. All that stuff that makes you anxious, that stuff that keeps you up at night, that stuff that swims round around your head like a goldfish bowl. Sort it out. I'm just going to say that, listeners, just sort it out. Because if you don't sort it out, your kids are going to have to deal with it.
Absolutely.
And when you're long gone, they're going to be still stressed.
Yeah.
So you've got to sort it out. Burying your head in the sand is not going to do anything apart from prolonging the agony, and you're going to pass on the agony to your children. So
yes,
sort it out. Whatever way you have to sort it out, whether it means going to a friend, a family member, going to Mind, getting therapy, counselling, speaking to someone in your church, just
medication.
Medication, meditation.
Yes.
Please sort it out for the sake of your children. Yeah. So
Absolutely.
that's my final words on it. Karen, any final words?
I think you've covered it all, ladies.
Well, Sarah and I we work a lot with children and adolescents, so we're very, very passionate.
Yes, we are.
About early intervention. So that's what you're hearing coming across. But we're not just making it up. I recently had to sit my mental health exam, which I passed, and I have a lot of handouts and stuff. But one of the statistics that really jumped out at me was that between 10 and 20% of children may require help at some point in their lives whilst they're still children. So chances are it could be your child. If we could just put away the shame of accessing help, we could really, really make a difference. So that's my final word. Let go of shame, let go of guilt. Be proactive, get the help alongside all the good lifestyle tips we've suggested tonight.
That's it. Perfect. Thank you, Kay.
All right. Thank you.
Karen, any last words?
I'm in complete agreement. I also work with children. And yes, I do a lot of work with families. I do try to take a systemic approach because I do think that it is systemic. Like you said earlier, children who are anxious, often their parents are anxious. Children experience depression. It's often because their parents are depressed. I completely agree with everything you've said. And like I say, I try to be a reflective parent. I do try to sort my shit.
Sort out your shit. Your kids don't have to.
So that my children don't have to.
All that stuff in the back of the car. On the bumper of my car. Sort out your shit so your kids don't have to.
And don't think it was easy for any of us to sort our shit. We have been the client. We know.
Yeah, we know.
In the
Years
chair. Yeah, exactly. It wasn't easy, but it was worth it.
And it's ongoing. It's ongoing.
Oh, absolutely.
You know,
for the first time, I'm working with a Black male therapist, and it's amazing.
Yeah.
But I'm 10 years down the road of being in therapy, so you know. Sorry, Karen, I spoke over you there.
No. I think we've covered a lot of ground tonight. So.
Okay, doke. So we are at the end of this podcast. We've enjoyed it. I hope you have, ladies. I have. Would love to hear from you. And if you do not mind us using your feedback or letters on the podcast, do let us know so we can keep your anonymity when we share your letters. Thank you for listening. Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
We are beautifully.